in this lecture, we're going to explore which cards reveal that it's time for your client to forgive, or if you're reading for yourself, that it's time for you to forgive. So I'm going to start with the tarot, and even if you don't know the tarot that much, the themes that I'll talk about will explain the card quite extensively for you. For me, when judgment comes up in a card reading for my client and they're asking about their ex, or they're asking about their current life, or they're asking about anything to do with their relationships, I know that the moment of truth is here for them, and it reveals that they've probably already done a certain amount of work. So either unconsciously or consciously, they're probably quite developed in their journey. Even if they've only just split up with someone, it might be a cycle that they've gone through before, and so it's not like they're in the absolute worst possible state they can be in. And judgment usually reveals that the worst is over, and there's just one more dip into self-reflection and taking responsibility that they need to make. So I'm going to give you an example of this. Say, for example, your client has come to you and you get the judgment card, and you can see that actually what's going on, or they've revealed that what's going on is that they knew all along that their partner, for example, never wanted to be in a long-term relationship. And they told them that. They said, look, I'm too busy working and I really can't commit to someone. And then you get more and more involved and you fall in love, and then the relationship ends. And judgment is where you go in and take responsibility for the part of you that kind of knew that but went along with it anyway. Not blaming yourself, but just taking a bit of responsibility for your part in the relationship. In a similar way, if there's been an affair, for example, now judgment might reveal, okay, what was your contribution to the affair? Have you been flirting with other people too? Have you been neglecting your partner because you're working too much? Now, again, we're not going into any kind of judgment, to use a pun, but we're not trying to do even the law of attraction thing. You manifested this because of X, Y, Z, but it's just about bringing your client back to taking a bit of personal responsibility for anything they could have contributed in their relationship. I've just finished reading The Big Leap, and I do highly recommend that book. It's a fantastic book by Gay Hendricks. And he talks about how, as a psychologist who counsels couples that are in relationship crisis and marriage counselling, he talks about how the only way that you can win and move forward is if both partners are taking 100% responsibility, because otherwise, when you're arguing with your partner, otherwise an argument is just a constant battle for who's the biggest victim. I'm not trying to degrade anyone who's been through a really awful heartbreak, and I'm not trying to say, well, it's your fault that your partner ran off and cheated on you, or it's your fault that, this happened, or that your partner never listened to you and you felt like they were an emotional rock, or all of those things. It's about being, okay, what am I responsible for? How can I take myself out of the victimhood? Because if you're just battling to be the biggest victim, then there's no moving forward if someone else is constantly to blame. And judgment's a card that reveals that. So I'm very confident talking to my clients about forgiveness when judgment comes up, because I go, let's look at your journey and maybe being able to forgive them, especially because judgment's also about the angels calling you, and forgiveness is a huge part of the angelic journey to healing and moving on. Now, justice is an interesting card. In custody battles, justice often indicates that fairness will be done, and it's a good sign that there's going to be a fair outcome. It's also a symbol that what you put out there, you get back. So if your client is talking to you in a way that's not very kind about their ex or their current partner, and they're saying some words that are not very nice, justice reveals that, okay, it's actually time for you to remember that any words and attacking that you're doing to someone else is going to come back to you. So why don't we send words of love? Why don't we send words of compassion? Why don't we send words of forgiveness? Even if you don't go up to that person face to face and do that, because that's not where you guys are at, doing it energetically, like being able to energetically go to somebody and say, okay, in meditation, or, I forgive you, I release this anger now, because you want to move on and you want forgiveness for anything that you've done in the past that's wrong. And, we're all made mistakes in relationships. We've all done things that are unkind. We've all hurt people. And so because you probably want that forgiveness too, you offer it. So that's a time when I will talk about forgiveness with my clients, when I talk to them about energetically what they're putting out there and how to heal that. Strength for me is a huge sign that my client now has the courage to face the journey of forgiveness. Let's face it, forgiveness is a journey that is intense, and it has waves and it goes up and down, and sometimes you feel like you've done a lot of work on something and then more stuff comes back. And strength is a sign that my clients at the stage now where they have the power within them to be able to go on this spiritual journey of forgiveness. So when strength comes up, I say, look, I really feel like being able to have compassion and strength and courage, the courage to forgive, and tell them, I know it takes a lot of courage to forgive someone. It's not easy, but if you can do that, you'll find that you will move on, you will heal, you will have more love in your own relationship, you will have what you need and what you're asking for in love. Now, the Eight of Cups is very interesting because the Eight of Cups in a reading symbolizes that your client needs to walk away from something. So this card will depend, when it comes to forgiveness, it will depend on a bit of time perspective. So if it's just come up, like say, for example, your client is saying, I don't know whether or not I should be with this person anymore, and they get the Eight of Cups, then that usually symbolizes they need to step back or walk away. If the relationship was a little while ago, then there's a symbol that they probably on some levels already physically walked away, and now emotionally they need to let go. So I'll repeat that again in case it's a bit confusing. The Eight of Cups will depend on the time frame. It will depend if it's something that's happened very, very recent and they haven't quite physically left the relationship. So maybe they're still sleeping together, or maybe they're still holding out hope that they're going to get back together. Then the Eight of Cups says it's time to move on. But if they've already moved on, then the Eight of Cups showing up in a reading says, okay, now it's time to walk away from this drama, like this internal pain, and forgiveness is a great road to do that for. The Six of Swords in a reading reveals to me that my clients actually probably maintained enough equilibrium, and they've gone through the hardship of the Five of Swords. I'm going to talk about the Five of Swords in a minute. And they're in a space where they can be more open to forgiveness. The smoother waters are now ahead. Then they're going to be noticing that things aren't as intense around them. However, they do need to let go of the past. And as most of us know, forgiveness is the number one key to letting go of the past. So when that comes through, I start talking to them. I say, look, just keep in mind that you want to start working on forgiveness now or in the very near future if you're not already. Now, the Eight of Swords is a fascinating card, and I go on about it quite a lot in Master Health readings because it is a common card that shows up in health readings as well, and anything to do with emotional well-being and mental well-being, the Eight of Swords will come dancing in. It reveals that it's only your fear that's holding you back now. So that means actually the environment around that person and their situation in life is at the point where they probably could be open to forgiving, because it's time for them to recognize that the person they're not forgiving is holding power over them. And as soon as they release that, or at least attempt to release it, or start the baby steps to release it, then that person will have no more authority and power over them. Because the Eight symbolizes in the swords that you basically are giving your power to someone else, and that's why you're paralyzed. I would say in this instance that I'd say, look, not giving this person any power anymore. And I would, however, check the other cards, and I'm going to talk about that a bit more, about the 9 and the 10 of Swords being near these cards, or the Tower being near these cards, and why I wouldn't talk about forgiveness if those cards showed up. So, the good old Five of Swords, the Five of Swords, which will show up in nearly every love reading, I might add, where someone's experiencing dramas with their ex. Because the Five of Swords is all about coming into our hearts and staying in our hearts, if it shows up for a client and they have some of these other nice cards around them, like Strength or Justice or anything that's a bit more positive, I would say it's time to go, let's walk away now. Let's find an emotional journey that doesn't feel so exhausting, because the Five of Swords is about you fighting your ex or your current partner from ego, and it's just going to keep you stuck in that story. There's no real winner there. So you need to encourage your client to stay in their heart and try to forgive this person, even if they are under attack. The Nine of Wands is a really great sign that your client is nearly at the end of their cycle. And yes, the battle's over. They're still wounded, and the only thing that's keeping them in the drama is that they're not moving forward themselves. Now, sometimes drama keeps perpetuated because, obviously there's material things that need to be sorted, or there's geographical things. Like, you might still work with someone, for example, which is a really hard way to get over someone when you have to see them every day. So that can be an example of, the battle's still kind of energetically going. The Nine of Wands symbols that actually you've in some ways you have moved on and progressed a lot. It's time to allow yourself to move forward. The victory of being healed or meeting someone else is so close, but you just need to be willing to stop looking over your shoulder and blaming the past. Oracle cards are a lot easier for this, and that's for the very obvious reason that they often have the word forgiveness written on them. So, it's easy to interpret. If your guides and angels, your client's guides and angels, the energy of your client that has transferred to the card, if it's come out as a forgiveness card, opportunity to forgive, be willing to forgive, I would take that as a very strong sign that you need to share that with your client, and that's the key for them to move forward. That's the key for them to meet someone else. That's the key for them to heal whatever aspect of their life they need to heal right now. Other similarities are let your past go, letting go, and let it go. So a little bit how I talked about with the Eight of Cups before, just being able to walk away and no longer engage, being able to release it now. It's time to walk away now. Now, I want to talk to you about crisis cards. So I've mentioned some of them already, but when they appear in the present position. So in a 3-card spread, in tarot cards, or in tarot cards with the horseshoe or the Celtic cross or any other kind of extended reading, there is often a card that represents you. And that means how you feel, you being the client, about the current situation. And when there's a crisis card in that position, so either the present position in a 3-card spread or in the you position, I will then be very gentle when I start thinking about what's going on with the aspects of forgiveness and where my client's at. If my client showed up with a 9 of Swords, for example, in the you position or the present position, I would suggest that they have been having sleeplessness, they're feeling brittle, they're overwhelmed, they're exhausted, but most of all, they're finding it hard to discern their worst nightmares from reality. So they might be a bit frantic. And when people are frantic and you start throwing in, juicy, loving, spiritual stuff like forgiveness, they can almost get defensive because it feels like that's just one more thing they've got to do, or they feel like they've heard that before. It's not helping them sleep. It's not helping them release their anxiety. So I would just be really cautious when I got that in that position. I'd be suggesting other more gentle approaches. So as I talked about with crystals before, I'd be getting a healing, things that are just going to take them out of the crisis of not being able to rest or being overwhelmed and exhausted. Now, the 10 of Swords is about being out for the count. So they've hit rock bottom. They've got nothing left to give. There is a new dawn coming. So you might, depending on what the other cards say. So if there is more positive cards that are in the future, say, for example, then you might go towards talking about forgiveness. But if you can see that they've hit rock bottom, then it might be too soon to start talking about forgiveness to them. They're still in that crisis. The 3 of Swords usually signals a recent heartbreak. So that's something quite recent with that. And so for me, it feels like there's too much chaos to be open. So again, like say your client hasn't told you that they've been recently heartbroken. That shows up in a reading, then it usually signalizes there's been a very significant heartbreak. Again, check other cards, but they might be in too much grief and chaos and shock to be open to talking about forgiveness yet. And I've mentioned also the Tower. The Tower is a time for your client where there's just chaos, like their whole rug's been ripped out from under them. They might be losing their home, their stability, their job. As we do when we break up with people, we lose so much. We lose our friendships, we lose our everyday routines, and we have to imagine life without someone. So when that's happening, I'd let the dust settle, suggest a later reading or a healing. Or again, if one of those former forgiveness cards show up at a later date, you could go into that, but just be very diplomatic and delicate during those times when a crisis card shows up, like the Tower. Now, in oracle cards, if this comes up in the present for me, one of these kinds of cards, so sleep or rest or gentleness or, giving all your care to the angels, this is a clear symbol to me that my client is just utterly exhausted and they've been totally worn out by the heartbreak or by recent life experiences. So adding something else to their to-do list, like you need to read this book on forgiveness or you need to forgive now, is probably just going to make them feel even more bereft. I would just say to them, I think you just need some time out. I think you just need to rest. I think you just need to let these adrenals that have been surging through you from this experience, just settle them as much as you can, because it might not be the time to be giving them spiritual homework, so to speak. So now let's talk about what happens when you get really strong messages. Now, trust me, you will. Like when you start tuning into a client, you might start feeling like there's some ice around their heart, or there's some black spots in their solar plexus, or you might simply just have an angel appear behind them that just talks about forgiveness and compassion, or something, some pink light coming out of their heart. Please honor this. Even though I've said all these times of when it's not a good time to share, if that still comes through for you really strongly, then please share it with your client and just say, look, I know you might not be ready to hear this yet, but all I can feel around you is that, you're on an amazing path of forgiveness, and that's going to happen in time. Maybe not yet, but it will be something, because even they might get back to that in a month's time and think, actually, I feel like I'm ready for that now. So if it comes through when you're psychically tuning in, then honor it. When I do love readings and I've got a very angry or upset client, I do spend a little bit of time, just a couple of minutes before I deal the cards, just tuning into their heart and just seeing what's going on in there. As I said, sometimes I'll get very strong messages and sometimes I'll just get total chaos. Like I'll get this electricity, I'll get this disjointed fragmentation, and then I go, okay, they might not be ready to hear about it at this present moment. So tuning into your client, and if you wanted to know more about this, I do go into this a fair bit in How to Be Psychic, about how to tune into their angels and tuning into someone else's guides and angels. That can really help you when you're looking at trying to get messages outside the cards for forgiveness. So to recap, when you're looking at forgiveness with your clients, it's not a black and white issue. And although so many of us might know and understand that forgiveness really is the key to healing and moving on with your love life and having the best love life possible, sometimes people aren't in a position to be able to forgive straight away. If they're in any kind of crisis, the best thing to do in your reading is try to figure out a way to get them out of that crisis. And if they are in a situation where they just can't, like they're in anger and they're bereft and they're beside themselves, then you want to help focus on healing those emotions before giving them too much spiritual homework. There are certain cards that will reveal for you when it's time to talk about forgiveness and when it's time to hold back. And I will include a PDF for you with some of the information that we shared in this lecture to help you with this journey when it comes to forgiveness and your clients.